So why use a keeled shank, which I'll define later, instead of a keel hook to tie a stacked blonde? The devil is in the details for this hook. While it has an improved weedless design, it has a small effective bite that reduces hooking ability. To remedy this, the point angle can be increased from 0 to 30 degrees to increase hookup, but seemingly decreases the fish holding ability as it made the hook angle 2/3 of the way to hook failure. Further, it's easy to overdress the keel hook, and that also interferes with hooking. So, for whatever the reason, the 79666 became less popular and is no longer made. Though other keel hooks are made that you could tie a stacked blonde with. In particular, the Ahrex PR378, which has a very large effective gap. I think it's a better alternative is go to a keeled shank with a stinger hook. Keeled shank is made by bending up a straight articulated shank into a form or profile exactly like the Mustad 79666. And when you add the stinger hook, you can vary the gap, the effective gap, and also you can turn the hook over and make it weedless. So using a shank is why the stacked blonde became a shanked blonde pattern. A shanked fly has several advantages, mainly flexibilities. You select the hook, you select whether the hook point is up or down, you select whether you use a trailing loop or a direct connect to the fly, and you notice here that the shanked blonde keeps the classic bucktail profile and also has the hook well placed out in the tail of the fly where many people prefer it. So now we're going to discuss porting over a Mustad 79666 hook into and take those dimensions and set up a straight shank to take on a keeled form. So we have to discuss the parts of a keel hook. So there's the eye run where the leader goes into the eye. There's the keel run, which is the bent part, and that's bent at 45. The body run is it's also the shank, but I decided since we're dealing with shanks that calling it a shank run would be too confusing. But since we're tying it on a keeled shank, there's no point, the hook is added. So the point run and the bend run have no relevance to how you design a shank. One of Kelly's innovations in the stack blonde design was that he used the keel hook reversed from its normal point down, weed free orientation. This allows the wing of both bucktail and marabou to be tied on to the keel run that projects up and over the body run. This wing has a springy action that pulses that wing during the retrieve. So to make a keeled shank, the keel run is bent up 45 degrees relative to the eye run. And then you take the body run and you bend it down until it's parallel to the eye run. So the last time it showed you how to get the angles right and bending up a keeled shank. And here we're going to look at the dimensions. I'm comparing here the Mustad keel hook to a Senyo shank. And we can see that the 40 millimeter Senyo shank with its diameter at about 0.036, 0.035 without the coating fits well with a mid-range to the size 6 and 4 hooks here. So that's what I decided to use. The other reason I decided to use the Senyo shank is that it chucks up well in my ultimate indexer. I can't even tie with a Waddington shank without turning it sideways, which drives me nuts. So that's why I selected the Senyo. So in this frame, we put it all together, all the angles and the loop dimensions and the runs, various runs, the dimensions of them. And I've done it both on a homemade shank, and a video making this homemade shank follows the testing a keeled shank segment that also follows the fly tying portion of this video. The Senyo brand shank is bent up in the tying the Shanked Blonde segment that immediately follows this one. So today we're tying on a Senyo articulated shank for steelhead and salmon. This is the 40 millimeter length. And we're going to start off, we're going to bend this shank into a keel hook shape. This is what I mean by a keel hook. This is a Mustad 79666 hook, the devil hook. And we're going to bend up this shank, this straight shank, into a keel. But first of all, we've got to tie on the stinger hook. And what I use is this Surflon Micro Ultra. It's the 1x9 strand, and it's the 17-pound material. And I've cut off a short piece here, and I've already tied in with the thread. We're going to tie a chartreuse colored one today, and we're tying it weedless, so the hook is going to be tied up on the upside of the hook. So this doesn't have to be that strong. This is just a jumper between the articulated shank and the stinger hook here. And we do it on outside of the eye. We want it, because the vise is going to be down here when we tie into the articulated shank. We want this jumper to come across on the upside so it doesn't get crushed in the vise. And we're ready to whip finish here. Cut off, and a little bit of dab of super glue just to hold it in place for security here. Doesn't have to be strong, like I said. This is not going to be load bearing when the fish strikes. All right. Okay, now let's take our Sanyo shank, and we have these flat nose pliers without serrations, and these jaws are 7 millimeters wide, and that turns out to be almost perfect for bending these into a keel hook. So we're going to have like an 8 millimeter run here and 45 degree. We measured the keel hook, and the keel run is bent at 45 degrees, about like that. And then we come back here, and at about 8 millimeters, we're going to bend this parallel back to the eye run. So the keel run is at 45. The body run is parallel to the eye run here, about like that. Okay. Now, you can see here how this chucks up pretty nice on that lower element. But we need our stinger hook in the up position, because we're going to do it weedless. Here, like this. And then the way I tie in a Dynaking Ultimate Indexer, and it has this nice port back here to put on a rubber band, and get this out of the way. I also put a little piece of silicone tubing on here so I don't harpoon myself. I've really caused some somewhat grievous wounds with the hook point. When you're tying away, you just don't notice. Okay, so then I got the jumper here. Tie in up here. Trim your thread off. I'm bringing the jumper over like this on top again. The thing about the jumper wire is it's all got to be in line, or else it's going to shift your hook around or put an angle onto it. So you take a straight piece of the stainless steel cable, and you get it straight on this hook, and then come over straight. And out of habit, I put a back loop on it to secure it. And I take my tungsten carbide pliers and cut off there like that. Now we're ready for tinsel. I'm using this 1/100th micro flashabou in the pearl. I'm taking about 4 or 5 strands. The exact amount isn't all that important. So the original recipe called for mylar tubing on the shank here, just ahead of this hook. And instead of that, I just put in mylar flashabou. And in one side, come around, and I trim it off to just behind the hook eye. I like to trim it early because it kind of gets to be a bitch when you got to trim it right when you've got the bucktail in the way. I also do one strand of this is the holographic flash mylar, and this is to suggest a lateral line. There, and again I trim. So again, this is because I'm hooking this directly onto the articulated shank. This whole overall length of this hook and stinger hook assembly is about 2 inches. So this is to make a trout-sized fly. So I've got my chartreuse. We're trying a chartreuse color today. You have to pick a pretty straight portion. And I'm not going to stack this because I like this to be sort of a natural termination. I've taken a bunch about the size of 2 toothpicks. And I'm stripping out the short hairs because they'll just add bulk without adding action. You just want the long hairs tied in. Sort of split it around your hook, although you can arrange this later. And about just beyond the hook bend. So this fly is going to be like a 3-4 inch fly. I'm going to pull it in a little bit. So I get a couple winds on, then I pull it up on top of the hook into a bundle because I want it to not flare very much. And I'm tying out towards the ends where it's less tubular and you get less flaring tying out there. Okay. And I cut it off at an angle. To give this sort of a tapered end. All right. So I do a light glue job. I've gone back to using super glue because the UV setting material I've read will not set. When it's out of the light, your set UV light, if it soaks in deep enough into the bucktail, it won't set. And so that's not good. You want it to hit the shank and set. So now I'm going to take my second stack, again about two toothpicks full. Clean out the short hairs. So I've let the super glue set on the body run here of this hook, of this bent shank. And now we're going to come up and tie in some ballast because of all this weight back here compared to a keel hook, to get this to float right, we have to put a little more weight up front. It's pretty straightforward. And also we want it to float hook up. So we have to have a counterbalance this high weight up here. And we do that by adding just a little bit of 030 lead. And this is going to form a platform for the last stack that runs out the base of the hook, the eye run here. And so this helps just keep everything lined up. And it provides support for the eye. Okay, we have tungsten predator eye. I like red. When I see baitfish that have been attacked, they usually have blood in their eyes. So I'm a fan of the red eyes. So that little platform we've set up has really helped stabilize the eye. So we're figure eighting it on. Getting it set right here. And then we come up to mid-shank, where we're going to put in another bundle of hair that I've already cleaned up. Now, this is where we diverge a little bit from the original Shanked Blonde. We're going to build up a pretty big head, and we do that by bringing this hair on either side of the hook, but we're keeping it long. We're coming very long, and we're going to tie that down over the top of the eye. And then figure eight over the eye. And trim on all this junk. I like a pretty big head with eyes to cover up the eyes. And they're tightening them down here. I'm pulling pretty hard on the thread right now to get that formed right. So this middle stack is just to add thickness to the fly. All right, now we're going to put in our wing stack. This comes up over the top, and this provides a bump in the middle of the fly, a hump that is thought to be the ideal form for a bucktail fly, to have a hump in the mid-back. And that's where the keel hook works so well on these bucktails, is
naturally is bending up and forcing up the bucktail into this hump form. This also helps thrust back against the marabou as we pulse the fly and gives it action. So I'm angle cutting, trying to get a taper on this baby. Didn't do a very good job, but I think we'll be okay. So I finger eight over the eye, come up towards the hook eye. This, you can see we're starting to build up our head pretty good. And we're building up the mass of the body in general. May have tied that in a little long. Okay, so I've let this super glue on the head set up, and now we're going to tie in the bottom stack. So we flip the fly over, we kind of gauge the length for the other ones, and we tie this in here, and we're tying it in on the platform formed by the lead, our counterbalance. And again, we're trying to build up a big head. So we figure eight over the eye, and then we got to try to taper this cut. And I do it by making a series of cuts as I move the scissors out. And that's just to put a taper in out here to the hook eye. That looks a little long. You definitely got to be careful not to get it up in the hook eye, all these this bundle of bucktail. So again, I'm cranking pretty good. Covering over the bucktail with thread, more or less. All right. So now we're going to add in the marabou, and I've pre-selected some. So here we have, you want this pretty long, and you might trim it a little, get rid of this sort of junk at the bottom. It's just going to clog up the action of the upper marabou feathers. You want this as long as possible, coming up over the wing. And I'm going to tie in two of these. And one on the far side. So I take a couple loops and I pull up to get it organized. And I crank down pretty hard again. And cut off short. All right, here's the one. So we're probably going to get it, we wanted to get it pretty long again. Cut off this basal. Tear off the basal part. Get to the high action feathers here. And then I'm going to tie this a little bit to this side and at the same length as the first marabou feather. Sort of tying down the ends of the marabou so they won't stick through the super glue. And then I would just come up and whip finish. I'm going to coat this with super glue. I got a little up there. I can find my super glue. Sort of hold the hairs back. You want to be kind of conservative around the marabou. You don't want to get it in there. Make sure you get the threads at the eye. And there it is, the Shanked Blonde, as I call it, which is just a stacked blonde by Galloup. That's tied. This is tied weedless style on a Senio Articulated-Shank. There's a keel shank that we're going to use to tie. So I've gone ahead and tied up one here, and the Senio chucks up really nice in this Dyna King vise here, like this. And I've tied on using a non-slip or cray loop, some 0x Trout Hunter, which is 15.7 pound test. So it's pretty good stuff. And I've tied on an Allen wrench that I'm going to pull. So the intent here is to show, and I have a clamp on my vise, and I've got my glasses on, so I'm going to pull. And the idea is to show you that these things don't deform. So there it broke. It didn't break because of a knot. It broke in the middle of a run, and you can see that this really hasn't deformed. So these are really strong. And for the tie, I've actually put the hook into the eye and then tied a little jumper over the top, a stainless steel jumper, to make it stand up. I don't like it when the hook flops down all the time. Also, it'd be very easy to tie one, put on a trailing loop, and put a stinger hook to make a much larger fly than this. This is what I'm doing for a trout-sized fly. So if you need to, you can always put a trailing loop and a stinger hook on these Senio steelhead salmon shanks that I've bent into a keel hook form. I use the AFW Surflon. It's the 1x9, 17 pound braided and coated stainless steel leader material. I use a big hook because I got tired of the keel hooks, the Mustad keel hooks, losing fish. I've gotten pretty aggressive with them, and to form the loop, I thread it on the fly, loop it over the back, and then bring it up through. Like this. And then I got really uneven. Okay, now a lot of people would leave enough so you can undo this hook and replace it and all that. But so this is going to make a very large fly. The base fly with the hook in itself is going to be, what, 4 or 5 inches long. So this is a huge deal. This would be for like a salmon steelhead fly or pike or really big trout. I usually fish around a two and a half fly for the trout, and maybe some 3-4 inch ones for trout, but that's about it. So this is very standard. You know how to do this. You've seen this. If you're tying on articulated shanks, you know how to put on a trailing loop and a stinger hook. And I'll wind up the shank. And around the bend a bit to give it further hold. Then I bend it back over. Itself, and I'm winding with a very tight thread. I normally would use 100D nano silk, but they don't make the chartreuse color, so I'm tying with 240 UTC ultra thread. And there you have it. This is tied weedless style. Oop, looped it, but it's tied weedless style. And I have a little rubber band here to hold it in place. And I usually put a guard on when I'm tying these babies, because these modern hooks are very sharp, and it's very easy to hang yourself on them while you're tying. So there it is, the Asenio tied shank tied in a keel style with a trailing hook and stinger. I just want to come back on here and say that after I've tied on the eye and coated the entire shank with thread, then I would come back before I tie in the bucktail, and I coat it with super glue. Now, I've done my research on this, and it seems that Pacer Corporation, the one that makes Zap-A-Gap, are one and the same with the Super Glue Corporation. And so the nice thing about this is I get this at the dollar store, and it's a very small quantity, but it doesn't go bad in the time that I'm tying. So it's a lot more economical. And I've also done testing where I've glued it up, let it dry overnight, and then put it under water for several days, and to see if it maintained its strength at the eye in holding the eye from wiggling on the shank. And it's still tight after several days of immersion. So I'm pretty sure that this super glue is adequate and up to the task of holding on for a large fish like this length of hook would portend that you're going to be fishing for. Today we're talking about bending up articulated shanks. You've probably seen the video where I tie up what's called a shanked blonde, which is based on the stack blonde pattern. The stack blonde uses these 79666 Mustad keel hooks, or they use the MFC 7055 keel hook, and they tie them inverted, so they're not really keeling. The the hook bend is down, not up. But what we wanted to do is get past this. There's problems with this hook hooking and holding fish, as well as clogging up because of all the bucktail being back in the bend. So what we're going to do here is we bend up the Asenio. This is the Asenio articulated shank for steelhead and salmon. It's a 40 millimeter version. And what we do is take that and bend it into a keel and then invert the hook. So the hook is going to be up in weedless style. As you can see here, the hook is up and well back in the tail where it should be. So, but what we're talking about today is, in turn, you can take this Malin hardwire stainless steel leader material and bend up your own hook shanks in any length that you want, depending on your needs. So, like I said, we're using the Malin, let me get the reflection right, the Malin hardwire stainless steel leader material. This is the number 13 in the 031 diameter, and it's 188-pound test. So this is strong material. These when you bend these up and put the thread on and close all the loops, these are very strong. To do this, we use various tools, but the key one is what's called the round nose concave pliers. And there's a page following this video showing all the ordering information for these specialized tools. But these are key. You got to get a good pair of these. So these cost me nearly $20. They have them on there for less than $10, but then you start worrying about this. I got one of those and it didn't close tightly and hold the wire tight. So that's key. The other key thing is a pair of flat nose pliers. So you can get these are 7 millimeters wide, and when you bend the wire through them, you get about an 8 or 9 inch flat segment, and that's about perfect for the keeled shank. The other thing is I have a pair of Avon tungsten carbide flush cutters. So this is a flush cut over here, and it cuts very tightly to whatever I want it to be at. The other thing I use is this is a diamond impregnated nail file, pretty small, but I use it to deburr after I cut the wire. It has burrs on it, and it can cut your tying thread, and it also can punch holes in your fingers. So I've cut off like a 3-inch piece of, maybe 3.5-inch piece of this hard stainless steel leader wire. And we're going to start bending it with the concave round nose pliers, and we're going to bend it the larger loop. This is where the stinger hook would go. And to do that, we come back about 3/4 of the way. We bend it up like this, and then we come around and we bend the whole shebang. And so then you keep coming around and bending and bending and bending to make this loop. Okay, this is probably a little bit bigger than we would normally want, like that. Okay, and then we bend this parallel. Like this. Then we come back, reverse the pliers, and come in. We're going to bend it and straighten it again. The idea is to get a 360 loop that's going to hold the stinger hook. You don't have to worry about this springiness, because when you put in your tying thread, that'll close that off. So this is where we would put the stinger hook, like this, and it'd be in the up position. If I can get it untangled, like this. And so what we would do, the next step is to bend in the eye on this end, which is going to be horizontal, a horizontal loop. And that's where the leader is going to go, on this end. So you got to get this kind of parallel. Let me bend this straight again. So then we're going to bend, the hook eye is going to be horizontal, and the stinger eye is on this end is going to be vertical. And so we got to get that right. So we're going to start, and this bend is a lot smaller, so we're much closer to the tip of these round nose concave pliers. So again, I'm reversing, bending it one way and then reversing them and bending the other way. And this gives you, you want a ring eye out there. It ends up like that. And it's perpendicular to the stinger eye. This leader eye there is smaller there. So that's how far we've gotten. So now we're going to put in the from the eye run here, we're going to bend up 45 degrees and build our keel part of this. So what I'm going to do though is I want to trim off this bit, a little bit of wire. And this is going to be where we put the tungsten eye, and also there's a stack of bucktail that goes on under here. And this double wire here provides a very secure platform to lash those elements to. Again, these are 7mm wide flat nose pliers, and I come off about 1 millimeter off the eye, and so we bend up, making the whole thing. The bend is not quite flat or flush, and so we end up with like 8mm, maybe 9, and we're bending up a little more. That's not quite 45. The original hook, keel hook, was 45, something like that. And then we have the body run up here. So this is the keel run, and that's at 45, and then we're going to take the body run and bend it back to 45. To flat. It's going to parallel the eye run. Oh, I overdid it. Like this. So we have the leader here. We're going to put the stinger hook here. Like this. And this will all close off with the thread. And so there you have it. A homemade keeled articulated shank.